Right, so we all know it's in conjunction with horse tribe and your horsemanship, and we're on desensitizing and clipping specifically. So let's have a quick look. So we'll start with desensitizing, and what is it? So when we introduce a scary object, such as clippers, for the first time, our horse's natural instincts can work for us and against us. And it's really important to know what these instincts are. So the 3 F's are the ones to be, are the common ones we all know about in terms of horses' reactions to things they're scared of or worried about. And then the other instincts which work for us, obviously curiosity and grooming. Now it's interesting, this picture. I really like the picture in terms of a demonstration of a horse that's obviously very flighty. But what I am interested in is the handler. So if you look at that handler in terms of handling a flighty horse, she looks like she's in a really good position. And funnily enough, the horse looks like it's worried by something. But if she does the right things, and I'll tell you what it is, because I always talk about this picture. If she sort of relaxes when that horse's back feet hit the ground again, she will have disengaged that horse and allowed that horse to stop and relax. So if you can see, those back feet are going to be going off to the, well, as we look at it, off to the right, and they're going to land with that horse looking back at her. So if that horse has got a fright, that would be a good way to manage a flight. I've got a flighty situation. Now I've got some videos and things to show you of later on in this webinar about handling horses that are a bit flighty and getting them used to clippers, but I don't have a horse that's reacting quite like that. So that's an interesting one. If you just take that picture on face value, it looks like a horse that's just being flighty, but it looks like this person has done quite a good job in controlling that flight, or potentially. I don't know what happens next, but it looks like it could be all right. So there's a couple of things to bear in mind. And just so we know, that's a flighty situation. A fight response is something that very rarely happens, although I will talk about that with clipping. And if you don't give a horse an option, then a fight response can come about. And we obviously, if you've seen that, it's ears back, and they'll either strike, kick, or bite in an attempt to sort of defend themselves or get out of a situation. And the freeze response is not always so obvious, and the telltale sign is generally in the eyes. And freezing is not a horse that is stopped and looking at something, because they are still compos mentis. They're still aware of what's going on around them, and they're still susceptible to inputs and getting a good response. A horse that properly freezes, if I'm riding these horses, it's the thing that worries me most about horses, and I will get off them, because these horses go into a place where if they were in the wild, an animal will have them, and they'll sort of become almost zombie-like. They're sort of, to the predator, they feel sort of like they're dead or conceded. But what they've done is they're frozen, allowing things to happen, and then suddenly there's going to be a burst of energy, and the horse could do anything from plunge forward, rear up and over, or all sorts of just wild responses. So a freezing response is something to be aware of, although it's probably the rarest form of flight, and it's generally caused when a horse has no other options. So I very rarely see that. Curiosity and grooming, these are things that horses do naturally to expand their environment and to interact together, and both of these are really important in clipping. Right, on we go. Sorry. So what is desensitization? So desensitization is a process where we train the horses to be less sensitive or to react less sensitively to stimuli. So when I talk about this, I suppose you can get horses that you can introduce just about anything to those horses that are really well handled. There you could sort of introduce something new. They might have a look, a bit of a sniff, but they sort of get on with it. And you know, if you don't have or handle that many horses, that's fine. But if you do handle a lot of horses, then you may come across a horse that is a lot more reactive, and that's where you need a process to manage these horses. So there's as I said, there's a softly approach where you introduce things very slowly over a long period of time, which may or may not get you to your desired destination. And those of you that have had issues with clipping will be able to testify that you've gone through the process. You do try to get them used to it just really slowly, and they still won't quite let you in. And on the flip side of that, you can show your horse and do what I suppose is called flooding, which is just show them until they just accept it. Or if you talk about flooding, they become non-responsive to basically any stimuli. We don't want to be too softly with them, otherwise we may never quite reach our outcome. And if we do too much, then it's not really teaching the horse. It sort of forces them into a state where they accept it. So I go for the middle ground, which is more of a CBT approach, which we'll talk about in a minute. Some horses are naturally more reactive than others. So it's you can have a horse that that you've done nothing with. You can walk up, show them, and just start clipping away, and they're fine. But again, you'll come across a lot of horses, the majority of horses that haven't seen clippers before. You can just switch the clippers on, and you'll find your horse has disappeared to the other end of the yard, and you're left with this burning sensation in your hand. So again, it's knowing the horse that you have before you approach desensitization, in this case clipping, because some need to start at a sort of smaller space. So we're introducing it more incrementally. Others you can sort of show them and notice that your horse isn't really reacting, so you can progress through the process much quicker. You can get other horses that can be really reactive because of trauma, and this can be because they've had something happen to them that has caused this sort of flight response. And these horses can be trickier, or are trickier to train than horses that have had no experience of clippers. Shall we just keep on topic of when you're desensitizing? So the reason is because they've actually learnt a behavior. So if a horse is you've gone to clip a horse's legs and they've kicked a couple of times and you've come away from that, then very quickly your horse is going to learn to react by kicking if someone goes by the legs. Same if you introduce and your horse runs off and pulls away from you. Well, again, that becomes an option. So and it's important to note. I just really want to say this because a lot of people think of trauma as, someone, you build up this idea of someone sort of, beating on a horse or something like that. It's not always the case. I find it very rare that happens, or the people that I deal with, definitely not. But some horses still do develop a trauma because the owners unbeknownst to them, introduced something that the horse is worried about, and the horse has reacted, and the owner hasn't quite managed that situation, and therefore the horse has learnt a bad behavior, not through anybody's fault, just because where a pressure was applied, the outcome or the release was from behaving in a flighty fashion, and therefore that becomes the answer. And it's, why wouldn't it be? It's held horses in good stead for millennia. So it's important to sort of get a history on horses if you're wanting to do this job. If you're doing it professionally, then you would always ask about, you know, experiences, and see if you can find out if there's been a trauma or there's been a mishap somewhere. And when you walk into a horse, you very quickly get an idea of the type of horse that they are, and how quickly you can go through a process. If horses are fully desensitized to one object in a certain environment, it doesn't necessarily mean that they won't react to similar stimuli in a different environment. However, the more you go through the process, the more trust your horse will build in you. So I think that what this means is lots of repetition in different environments, because when you do something once, the horse is just learning of the process. So if you change the environment, then your horse may have a more heightened sense of what's around them, and therefore, and you introduce something which you may think is less sort of in your face as some clippers, but they react in a really, you know, exaggerated way. So if that happens, you've got to look at the environment and start the process again, and just be aware. And I suppose when you're starting to clip a horse, you know, times to avoid are when everybody's turning their horses out, for instance. If it's feed time, you know, whereabouts is a good place to clip? Have you got the right space? So be just aware of your environment, because it does make a difference. Even if you've taught your horse something, the way they react in different environments can be surprising, shall we say. Yeah, I've made some other notes here. Yeah, I think that covers it. So in all cases, you're retraining strong instinctive behavioral pathways. So I think we all know that, and you know, but it's important to start and really understand some of these things before we get into our clipping and getting our horses ready to be desensitized. All right, before you start clipping, there's a few things that you must have on your horse. And here are 4 things that I think are really, really important. Maintain your personal space. Be able to prevent barging. And I know in my experience, it doesn't need clippers to find that a horse is bargy. They can be bargy at the best of times. So it's really important that we start to come up with some tools and techniques to manage that. Tying up exercise, which I use a lot, and placing your horse, which again is a movement. So to maintain your personal space, there's a few exercises that I use, and I'll go through these briefly. I mean, I do have these in the Your Horsemanship program, but for those of you that are not on there, I'll try and explain just a couple of ideas which work for me and help my members. So the first one is what I call watch where you're walking. Excuse me. So for this one, I go against the grain as far as the BHS is concerned. I have a rope head collar on my horse and a long rope, as you can see in that picture. And I actually teach my horse that if there's a rope on their legs, so I actively put the rope on around their legs, and I bump the horse until they step backwards. Excuse me. When the horse steps backwards, I release that pull from the rope. Now, once my horse knows this, then I walk, dragging the rope. When they tread on the rope or tread over the rope, I give the rope a little pull, or sometimes they pull on it themselves. They lift their head, feel the pressure on their nose, and step back. I don't know whether I can. I've got Woody here, who I'm going to bring in from time to time. So I'll just sort of. So I don't know whether I can quite do that. So if there's a rope around Woody's leg, it would be still attached to his nose up here. So I go from his nose, round his leg, and back up and back to my hand. So when I pull from around his leg, and he can feel that on his nose. When I pull on the rope, he feels it on his nose. When the horse steps back, they're getting some understanding. And as I say, as they walk along, they tread on the rope or they feel a rope around their leg, they step away. Very quickly, your horse learns to step back when they see the rope on the ground, and therefore giving you personal space. If you leave the rope on the ground, they stay behind it. So that's a good one that I use to help with personal space. Another one I use is I'll have a pole. I don't know whether you can see me here. I'll see if I can adjust this. I have a pole in the fork of my arms, a jump pole. Try and get a light one if I was you. And I walk, and with my horse behind me, I stop and I turn. So I pivot on the spot. Now, if my horse doesn't turn around behind me as I pivot, then they'll get a bump. And so I bump them with the end of the pole and just move them in and around behind me and walk on. This teaches them to move laterally around me, which is really important in terms of maintaining your personal space. And because I use this pole in the fork of my arms, I don't faff or get tangled up with anything. And it becomes very clear to the horse what I'm looking for. So there's two ideas. You may have your own, and that's fine. Some people will wiggle a rope until their horse steps back to help keep some space between them and their horse. And there's lots of techniques which can be used, but make sure you are able to do that. Preventing barging. For me, personal space, if you can protect your personal space or maintain your personal space, you'll pretty much have covered this one, although your ability to move your horse's hind end will be really, really important in the beginning. So being able to get your horse to step over with their back legs or step laterally with their back legs, which you probably will have already started when you've had the pole and walking around, stopping and pivoting. You'll have started that process. To bend a horse, if you're static or standing still just with a lead rope, what I do is I'll walk from my horse's head. I'll be about 2 foot of rope between, so I've got Woody here. I'll walk towards my horse's hip and I'll pull. Woody may not want to bend, but eventually he'll have to bend in the neck. Now, when he bends in the neck, what that's going to do is flick his hind end around. The moment he flicks his hind end around, I release and walk on. Now, moving a horse's hind end is really important for preventing barging because it basically stops the shoulders from moving. If you think if the hind end is stepping around, then it's pivoting on the front of the shoulder. So it's more or less, I suppose, a turn on the forehand, if you want to put it into a dressage turn. And when that happens, the front slows down, which means it's less likely to be able to bump into you. So it's really, really important movement to be able to teach your horse, particularly if they're barging. And the reason that one, I always start with that one, is because it turns your horse. It puts your horse in the least powerful position, so it's more susceptible to my ability to control them. obviously horses are much, much stronger than us. So we have to use our nous and our horse's weaknesses, which this would be. They're more likely, once they've got a bend in their body to engage, they need to straighten. But for them, for a moment, that disengagement will get them back in a controllable fashion, particularly if they're pushing. So that's a really good one. Moving the shoulders is also important. And to do that, just very briefly, I'm going to talk too long if I keep trying to explain too much. But moving the shoulders is all about being able to step your horse back from the head collar. So again, I'll bring Woody in. So if I ask Woody to step back, I'll have his rope around his nose here. It'll be just touching here. I'll ask him to step back using that pressure. When he steps back, I'll just walk into his space. So I'll move in here and I'll keep moving until he moves his head away. He'll probably move his head away and I'll be looking down at his feet. And what I'm looking for are his feet to step across. If they don't step across, then I'll just ask him to step back a step again, and then I'll walk into his space again. If he doesn't step across again, I'll get him to step back. Eventually, with that sort of repetition, your horse will step back, and eventually as they're stepping back, they'll take a step out to the side. And at that point, I'll release and just give them a moment. So what I want to teach them is that when I step into your space, the best thing to do is step sideways out of it and move the shoulder out of it. So that would be the second phase of getting your horse to or prevent them from barging. And it all comes down to controlling the feet. Right, tying up. So I really like to, again, move my horse on the tie so that your ability to move your horse from left, relax, walk around the other side, move them back to the right and relax, is really key in control and teaching your horse to tie up really well, because they need to learn their boundaries. And all this groundwork is about teaching your horses about boundaries. So being able to move your horse left and right on the tie, really, really important. Placing your horse. Again, I like this exercise because it means you have to control. So when I'm placing my horse, it's basically about getting your horse to stand square. Now, to get a horse to stand square, you might just stop, and they'll stop with one foot in front of the other. Is being able to, I hold them up tight under the chin because I want everything to come through the head collar, which will eventually mean the rein when we start to ride. But I want to be able to move them and try and get this foot here, if they're standing off center, to step up into a square position. Now that requires a bit of feel, because if you pull too hard, they end up walking on you and stepping too far. If you don't offer enough energy in your hand, then they'll just stay put. If you get too rushy, because sometimes you put energy in and they're just trying to compute about what to do. Sometimes you just need to wait and then just get that one step. So I really like the placing your horse both left, right, forwards and backwards. And it's just about moving your horse a step and getting them to square up. It's just something I might do every now and again just to test my control and my feel, and also how responsive my horse is to moving on the head collar. So there's a few little groundwork exercises that I think are really important to have on your horse before you start clipping. All right, on we go again. Okay, the stages of desensitization. Now I'm a bit scared here, ladies and gents, because I know I'm gonna click on this video link and it probably won't work given the start I had, but fingers crossed we'll get something to happen. So the follow, so these are my stages: follow, stand, touch, pounce, and the legs and the head, which are slightly different to the first 4 points. But basically, desensitization, I follow this process when I'm introducing new objects, particularly clippers. So follow. I'll run the video and then we'll see how it goes in terms of explaining follow, and then I'll cover any bits that I might want to add. So here we go. Let's see what happens. Yes. Okay, bear with me. I'm just going to check, see how sensitive he is to this. How do I check how sensitive he is to it? Well, I start walking away from him. So I'll turn it on, see how sensitive he is to the noise. So a little bit sensitive. I can see snorting a little bit. I'm reading some signs there. And he's a little bit tense, but you can see the concrete's sort of starting to work. You can see the concrete. He's a bit sort of unsure of his feet, or a bit sure of his feet. He's being very sure of his feet. He's been quite careful. Now, I forgot to introduce my desensitizing object. I think Oral-B make them, okay? So I use these to start horses getting used to clippers. There's also apps, there's clipper apps where the phone vibrates and makes the noise that you can use as well, all sorts of little things. But like with all desensitizing, start with something that's easy, a little bit smaller, and mobile is important. You don't want to be trying to clip your horse with cords everywhere, because your horse will stand on them or they'll get away from you, and it ends up with broken gear and horses learning bad habits, all sorts of things. So this is a great little substitute and a place to start. Okay, so I've just introduced it, and I'm finding, I don't even know whether I'm going to get to his body, let alone his legs, which is what I intended to show you. But anyway, we're desensitizing nonetheless. So let's just go through stage 1 again. So he's had a little think. I've stopped, chatted to you guys. He's reflected, and we'll just see what he's thinking about that again. So we might even just do our little circles again. So he's swapped sides, so I'll just do our little circles. Keep him that side. I'm on the inside of the circle. Now I'm walking away, but I'm walking away in a little circle. And he's looking to actually stop a little bit there. See what he's doing with his body and his head? His head is going away and his body is coming to me. That is exactly what horses, ponies do when they are about to bomb off. So I don't know whether he's ever done that before, but he's in the right shape that if I push that, so if their head goes away from you and their body comes towards you, that is where you could lose them. You see that sign, then you need to correct that bend very quickly or take away whatever is causing that bend. Right. Now let's see if we can get back to where we were. Cool. Okay, that was interesting. I don't know whether anyone has any questions about that. There's a couple of points that I could probably, I will clarify there. So I'll start off with the follow. So you might have been wondering what, as I said, stage 1, we'll go back to that. So following is basically, although I was on concrete, and I'll talk about that again in a second, following is basically walking with an object that your horse might be worried about. And you need to find an object that your horse isn't terrified of. Otherwise, like I say, they'll be in the back corner, you'll have a burnt hand. You need to find something that your horse is slightly worried about. So you need to push their tolerance, their threshold, a little, but not so much as they become overwhelmed. And I do that first by finding something they're a bit worried about, and then I walk away from them. Now, walking away from them, from your horse, makes you appear more like a prey animal. I see so many people when they're trying to introduce a foreign object or a horse that an object that your horse might be worried about, by walking up and go and say, "Here it is, you'll be right, mate." And the horse going, oh my God, what is that? And getting into a flight state. And once they go into that state and they're a bit cautious, it takes them a little time to settle, because what you've actually done when you've said, here it is you've behaved like a predator, because that's what they do. They attack, they come towards you. So it's a horse's natural reaction to sort of, if something comes towards them that they're not sure about, is to move away from it. So I've reversed that. Well, I've said, well, I know you're worried if I move it towards you, so I'm going to get you to follow me. So when stage one is complete, your horse will be following you in a fairly straight line, and they'll be walking fairly relaxed. You won't be having to tow them unless you're towing them all the time. It's what's normal, and you shouldn't be having to do that. But your horse is walking normally behind you is a sign that they're starting to become a little bit desensitized to whatever it is. And then you might start to move it around. I hold it above my head, I bring it in behind me, but the whole time I'm moving away from them. Now, I was doing that in a slightly more confined space, but it was, hang on a second. Oh. Yeah, I was doing that in a slightly more confined space, but there was still room to move, and I was moving about. Now, so that's follow, and that is stage one. So always start there. I was doing it on concrete, and this was I was adding to this in this particular demonstration, because horses, when they're on concrete, and again, this horse, I knew the groundwork was reasonably good. Horses in this situation will, they walk around concrete and they feel a little bit sort of unsteady, so they're a little bit more careful and less likely to react. So before I've even done this, I'll move them around on the concrete. I do a bit of groundwork on there, so they're sort of a bit aware of what they're on before I start going through the process. You don't have to do it on concrete, and in some situations, it's best not to. So again, and I will talk about this later, but you need to sort of pick your horses and go through the process accordingly. But there's little tricks like this in terms of your environment that can work in your favor in some situations. But you have to use your nous, your common sense to sort of think, for this horse, I think this might be the best place to start, or for me, this might be the best place to start. Okay, the next stage of desensitization is, I can't see questions either, guys, because I'm sort of, I don't know, I'm on the
Don't worry, I'm looking at the questions. We haven't got anything asked yet. I'll shout off if we do.
Cool, thanks, Heidi. Okay, so the next stage of the process is to get your horse to stand. So standing is basically a sign that your horse, if I'm moving it around and my horse is following quite sensibly and feels normal, then I might turn to face them and I'll sort of move around them and just see if they're happy to just stand there while I move around them. And once I've got that, if they do move away from me, then I'll just follow until they stop. Or I'll keep the exact same distance that caused the problem. So where's Woody again? So if my horse started to react by moving away here, then I'll stay at this same distance. When my horse stops, I just take it away and my horse goes, oh, if I stop and stand when that thing's moving around me, whatever that object may be, clippers or a toothbrush, then it goes away. Fine, that's an answer. And that's what we're trying to do, give our horse answers to questions. Excuse me, I get this little tickle in my throat when I talk a lot, so apologies for that. All right, next is touch. So I've got a little video for that. Let's play that and see how we go. Rub over whether it's all down. This is what. Okay. He's thinking, I can't see it, or I'm not sure what's going on there, but I'm just checking contact all round. So again, that contact is really important. Stage 3 of the desensitizing. This is really the process that I want you to get when you're working down a horse's body. So once you get contact here, you can keep the contact and it's quite reassuring. However, when you start to work down a horse's leg, desensitizing is done differently. It's done by going down and off because of the response horses give you when they get worried about something on their legs. It can be dangerous. So if you try and leave something on there until they stop moving or they just go, oh, it's okay, it's not hurting me, in the meantime, they could strike or kick. So when you're desensitizing down the body, it's really important to go down and off, down and off. At the point you feel like it's too much, come down, come up to where they're more confident, start up here again, go down, so you find where they start to lose their confidence, come off. And just do it in a piecemeal fashion like that. It's because that's how a horse responds to inputs, or particularly flight, in that part of the body, anywhere under here, the lower part of the body, and sometimes is the head as well. Is a good approach, sort of more of a, there it is and I'm gone type thing. And now I have it on him now. My hand, see, it's not actually touching him, but there's a very small vibration through my hand, and it's just the next step that I take from just rubbing him over to there, and then I can turn it over, and now it's on, as you can see. And this, I want him to start to get comfortable. Horses start to like this. It's sort of like a massage. So there we go there. And we're working the top part of the body. So we can keep going through that process, and Frogget here is going to start to get calmer. He's going to move less. And become more confident. If I try and confine that and really hold him and stop him from moving, we'll do the opposite. So you have to be a little bit aware of that. So there it is on. So as I work my way down the legs, it's there and off. There. Apologies for the buffering, guys. Is it all right?
Yeah, it does keep coming back, so
we'll bear with it.
Yeah.
And off. And off. Good. And with the back. There and off. There and off. This relative. All right.
Do you want me to try and share it, Jason? My internet might be a bit more stable. What do you reckon? Or do you want to just talk through the rest?
Shall I just talk through the rest? We'll just we'll leave that. So for that, we've actually skipped through to the last one. It does talk about touch, but number 5 is about how to desensitize the legs. And in that, you were sort of getting an idea of how I would do that. So it's just a really important, because it's a slightly different approach. In terms of touch, when you're introducing something, first associate what you have with your own touch. So I didn't actually, that sort of cut a few little corners there. So I'll just be really clear as we go through. And that is, I might have the in this case, the toothbrush was on, but I'd be rubbing him with my hand with the toothbrush on, or in my pocket, probably, because I'd want to have both hands on, just be rubbing him all over like that to start with. So I'm not actually touching him with the object yet. I'm getting him used to the sound and trying to get an association that that sound feels like this. And therefore they start to go, well, that's okay. I can hear it, but it feels like that. And then from there, I'll go from this touch, and then I'll bring whatever it is on, and then I'll start to go through the process as you saw in that video. I think it's really important to sort of note that, you know, I did talk about curiosity at the start of this webinar, and you've got to be very careful about forcing curiosity. So a lot of people I've seen, in terms of getting their horse used to an object, is basically shoving it under their nose and going, there you go, and have a look at that. Come on, have a look at it. And I've found doing that, some horses have a naturally curious tendency, and so they will go, oh, well, what is that? And they will sniff, and there's your contact, and you can go through that. But over the years, I found there's a lot of horses that see that as slightly predatory and do sort of start to go into a flight state. So, and the more you sort of say, here, have a look at it, the more they think, oh no, it's coming after me. So just read your horse on that one. What never seems to fail is going through this process in this way. So I don't go to their nose, because the nose, if you think about, if your horse is still sort of unsure, if you go to their face, that's a sensitive area of the horse, and the horse will protect that. So the least sensitive areas are obviously up by the horse's neck, or where we stroke our horse, really. Neck and withers, that sort of area is more approachable for a horse. So that's where we rub our horses a lot. They're used to contact, and that's where I'll start my introduction. And then I'll start to go to more sensitive areas as they get more used to it. I don't rush the legs or the head. That's a bit of on and off, confidence, on and off. So there's a couple of things to think about in terms of touch. The other thing is, you would have noticed in that video that my touch was firm. If you're a little bit soft with your touch, again, it can be irritating. It can be, you know, if someone doesn't have a good contact on you, it feels either a bit creepy, or it feels sort of annoying, like a fly's landed on you or something like that. If it's a bit too firm and a bit too aggressive, then obviously it feels threatening, and again, you'll get a slight flight response or a fight response, depending on the horse. So yeah, so a nice, and you'll hear me talk about this a lot, as with the process in itself, it's finding that happy medium between the two. So think about that in terms of your contact. Now, the pounce, you might be wondering what this is. Well, we'll see what this, we'll have a look at this video, and I'll talk through this as well, if it doesn't buffer too much. If it buffers too much, guys, well, we'll move on. And the one thing that I really be careful to make sure you do is a still racket. So that racket there, still, whilst the horse is moving, is terrifying for horses. So that little, and I call that the pounce reflex. So if you imagine a cat sitting in a bush ready to jump on a horse, that's what that racket is when it's sitting there still by their side and following them. Okay, it's ready to pounce. So there, so I'm quick to do this. Ah, did you see that? So you can see she hasn't reacted at all of this desensitizing operation until I did this. So there's that racket there, move and contact. There it is there, move and reassure. Okay, let's do the other side. Rub. Sometimes you'll find that when they look at it, they get a bit worried and they'll say, well, I'm just going to stand still.
because they stand still. That's where I've worked out is my safe spot. But they have to learn to move whilst they're doing this, because when you get on and ride them, if they look at a still racket outside and you say move, they might get a little bit panicky. So make sure you desensitize that pounce reflex.
Okay, good, nice and quick, no buffering. Oh, sorry, that was in small. Good, so, oh, sorry. So the pounce reflex, just to go over that, is once you've taught your horse to stand, you've made contact, they're happy standing, they've seen it moving a little bit, but when you hold something still, as it said in the video, and you ask your horse to move, if it comes with them, it feels like they're being stalked and they're ready to pounce. So it's something that I just called it. I call it the pounce reflex, but you can understand why a horse might find that really disconcerting. And I found out about this one day when I did all my desensitizing, although I didn't know about the pounce reflex. I was sitting on my horse and the racket was still. And I noticed my horse's ears. Now, this is another really important point that I want to make when you're desensitizing. Watch your horse's behavior. The ears, if the ear locks down on an object, there's Woody, we'll bring him back in, he likes a bit of showtime. If you see a horse do this and really lock down on an object, then they're watching it really closely, ready for something to happen. So I'm sitting on my horse. I've been moving it around and getting used to it. I hadn't actually held it still. Sat there and I noticed my horse watching it. I just didn't think anything of it because I'd done all my desensitizing. I walked off and this horse started running sideways. And from that moment I thought, well, why on earth did my horse do that? And I started moving it around and it calmed down. But it was because it was still and following it that made this horse do this. So from then on, I introduced this stage of desensitizing, and since I've found I've had so much greater success. Well, a lot of success. Sometimes I've got to repeat the process 2 or 3 times with sensitive horses, but generally speaking, they all sort of come through really well. But this is a really important part of it. Desensitization in movement and having an object still as well as moving around. Okay, so that covers the process of how I go through desensitization, and in particular with clippers. All right, let's see what's next. Okay, desensitization for clipping specifically. So I have a training ethos, and that is your safety, your horse's safety, and then train, or in this case, clip. If either of the first two are compromised, you don't carry on. You've got to recognize that you're both going to be okay before you can train. Don't work in a stable, work in an open space with your horse untied. Now, you may have picked up on this in the video that I showed you, but if you work in a small space like a stable, because a lot of people, I know people that have held their horses in a corner while they get their horse clipped, and I know a horse here that was done to, and this horse was aggressive to clip. I mean, it used to come at you, so they had to sedate it, and even when it was sedated, it would try and kick you, or if you got in the wrong spot, it would bite you. And this horse was a 4-star event horse, and the reason this horse got like this was because he was sensitive, and to clip him, they put him in a space that he couldn't move. So this horse had no choice but to become aggressive or use the fight instinct. So that's why I allow a horse to move, and I can see what's happening with that flight when they're moving. And as it comes down, I can start to work through the process. Use dummy clippers to start with, such as an electric toothbrush or beard trimmer, as you saw in the videos. Get something like that, small and portable, that makes a sound like and vibrates like clippers, and get them used to that, and then move on to your actual clippers. When you move to clippers, use cordless if at all possible, always start at the neck and shoulders, as these are the least sensitive areas of the horse, and this is where you generally give them a rub. We spoke about that. Don't expect to do all the clip in one go to start with. So I have had this. I've had somebody who's got quite a sensitive horse and asked me to do a full clip. And I said, well, for the future of the horse, because if you do a full clip, it can take some time. And again, we're trying to build tolerance to clipping. So I said, why don't we just do a simple bib clip or something once I've been right through the process? And that's going to get you a really good start. And then we can build up to, sorry, excuse me. We can build up to doing a full clip. So yeah, think about that when you're going through. And also, I did have something else about that. Hang on. Something else. Oh yeah, that was really, really good one. Yeah. The other thing I do before I actually actively clip my horse is I'll clip the horse where I want to clip it backwards. So I don't actually run the clippers through, because if you've done this, some of you may have, you've started a clip and you thought, well, I've done my desensitization, you've started clipping, and suddenly you've found an area that your horse is a little bit sensitive to. Now your horse looks like a patchwork quilt. They've got little patches out of them and that sort of thing. So what I like to do to double check, oh, I'm really sorry. What I like to do to double check is run the clippers backwards over all the clip that I want to do, and just make sure that they can tolerate it. And I might do it at the speed that I would clip a horse going forward to check their tolerance. If I feel them sort of starting to get to a point where they've had enough, and that you have to be careful with a horse that you think may have had enough, because those horses, it might be that that's what you need to work through to get them to the point where they stop again. So if you get to a point where they start to move and so you think, oh, they've had enough, you have to get them to a good point before you stop. So get them to a point where they're standing again. So again, stick with it until they go, I'm going to move and see if it stops. No, it's not stopping. So I'll stand. Oh, now it stopped. So we're constantly visiting that process as we build the horse's tolerance. And the one thing that I have made a little note here, post note, is hair falling on the ground. Get some straw or some shavings from your bedding or whatever, and make sure your horse is okay with you sort of dropping a little bit on the ground over its neck and around and on the ground as well, because, and just do that incrementally if they are a bit worried about it. I've seen horses really snort and look at the ground with things falling off them. So that's another little one to desensitize your horse to. Yeah, that's something that I have found with just a couple of horses, but it's a good one to know. Have a hay net at hand for distraction, or use things like equine exceeds karma bites, just to give you a little edge once they're settled and they're good with tying up, if you do have them tied up. Again, I like to do that further on down the process, and the distraction of hay nets or getting them really relaxed using a karma can just increase your horse's tolerance if they take a little while to clip. Whoops. If you're, let's just get rid of that. Okay. Sorry. If you're not experienced at clipping, it's well worth spending some money on a professional to get your horse fully accepting clips. So you might get someone like me to help, or there's a great guy who I use because I am not good at clipping. I get them all ready for clipping, but there's a great guy I use called Tom Diamond. I mean, you guys will have somebody who's really good at clipping. Do your homework first, make it easy on them, and they'll get a good job done. Good first experience, you're set for life. So there we go, guys. That's the few tips that I've got for you. If you want to know more about this, you can go into Your Horsemanship for those members that are on the program, and you can go through these modules, the desensitizing module, the clipping module, and there's some various things that you'll see this process in the re-education course as well. So let me see if I can jump out of here and see if we've got any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jason. We haven't got any questions yet. So guys, if you've got some questions specifically for Jason, either about clipping or I guess about broader desensitization questions, they're all good. So do type away and we'll ask those to Jason. I think that was really interesting, Jason. I've just got I've had about 6 weeks a 4-year-old. So I've not had a 4-year-old for about 20 years. So this was perfect timing. Absolutely excellent. So yeah.
Well, it is just, you know, this is the time of year where, you know, our horses are starting to get a bit hairy, but we've got a bit more time to go, you know, maybe do, well, some of us don't have much more time, but, you know, if we want to keep riding our horses in the winter, then clipping's quite pertinent right now.
Yeah, definitely.
So are you going to clip?
Yes, but just a little bit. Was what I was thinking. But not yet.
You have to follow a few of those tips and see how you go.
Yeah, definitely. I've taken my notes as I've gone, so I definitely will be. She's thankfully got a very old head on young shoulders, which I'm very grateful for. But that doesn't mean that she's just going to be accepting of everything. Like you said, it's different things are going to spook different horses in different ways, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, and the beauty of this process is that if you go at the start, you'll be, if you do the following bit first, you go, oh, you don't seem to be too worried about that at all.
Yeah.
And you can move on to the next stage. And whereas other horses, you can feel they're a bit worried and you just got to take a little bit more time with it.
Absolutely. All right, we've got a question here from Anne. So Anne says, my cob is great for clipping her body, but hates her legs being clipped, mainly as they're sensitive from mites. Any suggestions? I have to twitch her at the moment for her legs.
Yeah, when they have mite issues, it can be really tricky because they're actually a bit sore. So no, I mean, you know, if you are twitching, and that is an option, you'd like to sort of move away from that. And I do think that doing this process, you know, where I was going on and off, because what you find is when you go down with clippers, they stamp their legs, they do that sort of thing, which makes it really hard to clip. And it comes down to timing. If you're going on, they stamp their leg, go down the leg, they stamp again. You keep repeating that until the one time you go down the leg, they don't stamp. And then you stop, move to another leg. And then after a while, they start to go, okay, I don't particularly like this, but if I stand still, it moves away. Of course, if they used that in the past and they have succeeded in stopping you from doing their clipping, then they've already got a learned habit. So it takes more repetitions for this to work. So it is about watching your horse, keeping safe down the leg until they stop doing that flight response or that move away response.
And do you ever use positive, like treats or scratching or anything when they're doing it right?
Absolutely, yeah. If a horse has done something well, you know, a little treat here and there is good. You've got to be a little bit careful with treats because, you know, you can be trying to clip and all they want to do is turn around. So I always say to people, if you're giving treats, it's got to be, you know, at the right time, and you've got to train them basically to not take it unless you're, so there's a process. Do your groundwork on that too. So you've got to be able to move around them with treats without them trying to take them from you, just correcting that. And then when they do something that's desirable, then you give a treat. Absolutely, it's a good thing to do in conjunction with this work.
Yeah, but avoid being mugged, as you said.
Well, yeah, I've just seen it happen a lot, and it can be quite frustrating when you are trying to clip because they're not standing still. They're bending their head and trying to, you know, get in your back pocket type thing.
Yeah. If any of the stages you have, you know, a big problem and the horse does go into that fight, flight, freeze kind of response, even though you've done the first few stages, what's your response then?
So I find if I start with the following exercise first, as I said in the presentation, you start small. If it's a big problem, then you've got to find a way in. So you've got to start with something that's palatable enough. It does test the horse, but it's palatable enough for you both to be able to go, okay, I can accept this, and then build from there. So if you find yourself in a really bad spot, it probably means you've dived in a little bit too quickly. And for what I might find acceptable, somebody else might not. So it's got to work for you as well as the horse.
Yeah, good point. Good answer. Thank you. Any more questions from anyone? I think you've covered everything in perfect detail, Jason, and everybody's clear what they need to go and do.
Well, if you take one or two tips away, that'll be great. And
absolutely. I need to modernise my clippers because I still have wired ones, which are not ideal for a young horse, I don't think.
Wired ones are fine. The wired ones are actually, or the ones with cords, are the best because they offer the best clip. And that was the other thing I was going to say. Make sure your gear is good, because can you imagine, you know what it's like when you've had a haircut and the clippers are blunt and they're basically pulling your hair out. So there's little things like that can make a huge difference as to whether the horse is going to be good to clip in the future or whether they're going to see it and think, and not that again.
Yeah. Because
I've seen horses basically go to sleep when they clip because it's, and I quite like a haircut as well when the clippers are sharp. So yeah, but if you go through the process and your horse is relaxed with it, so you need to have your cordless, I think, for training.
Yeah.
But as your horse gets better, like with everything, you can move on up, and getting to that stage where you can use a cord attached to the is just the last step.
Yeah, and checking the heat as well, isn't it? Because it's quite very easy to get carried away and forget that the clipper blades can be quite hot.
Get hot, exactly. So yeah, great. That's a great shout as well. Yeah,
great stuff. Thank you, Jason. I'm just going to quickly pop up some of the other webinars that we've got coming up, and then I'm going to put the contact details for Jason so that people can get in touch and find out more about your horsemanship. So just with Horse Tribe, over the next few weeks, we've got a few more webinars coming up. We've got Andrew Hemming, who's at Royal Agricultural University. He's one of the researchers and lecturers there. He's an expert in neuroscience. What was brilliant about him, he's really good at relating it in normal language so that we can understand how our horses' brains impact on their behaviour. So really fascinating content there. Then we've got Ali Wakelin coming in to talk about some groundwork. So building on what Jason said, the importance of getting your groundwork right. She's going to be talking about moving sideways specifically. And then we've got an interesting webinar on the 20th of October looking at fully flexible saddle technology. So where treeless saddles have gone, because I know a lot of people are quite interested in what they are. So we've got some people coming to talk to us about that. So there's the next few weeks. And then Jason, to get a hold of you, these are the best places to find you, and also where your horsemanship website is. So yeah, if you want to find out more and experience more of Jason's wise words and knowledge, then that's the best place to go for lots of Jason. Fantastic. And we've also got another couple of webinars on Horse Tribe as well, if you want to find some more of Jason's stuff. So I think all it leaves is to say thank you. So
it's a pleasure, Heidi. Thanks for having me.
No worries. It's been absolutely fabulous as always. So thank you so much for your insight and your expertise.
Yeah, not my expertise with technology on my best.
You do horses, like you said. Well, when we leave the webinar, folks, there's a quick questionnaire. If you do have a chance just to fill it in, that'd be great. Gives us a good bit of feedback and also give us some ideas for future webinars, things you'd like to find out about. But otherwise, thank you so much, Jason. That's been brilliant. Lovely to see you.
Cheers, Heidi. See you, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Bye.